Good morning, Paula. How's it going?
It's going good. I'm back in town, and Joe has left for a week to finish up taking care of the children. So I have had a few days all by myself again.
Okay. Sometimes that's really pleasant to have the house to yourself.
All the time, that's pleasant.
Yes,
I
thank you.
think I think I could be a great hermit.
I do too. I feel the same way. Um, Occasionally there'll be, one of these posts on the internet, like some village in Switzerland needs someone to apply for their hermit position. And I'm like, oh, I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as they had good restaurants nearby.
Right, right. Yes. Yeah. There was a place in England recently that's an island, and
I
you
saw
could
that.
apply.
I thought about showing you that job
You,
post also. I was
this,
like, we could do that.
you could apply to be king of the little island, and you just have to maintain the bed and breakfast there. And I'm like, I can do that. I should do that.
Wish we could send Putin to be king of that island.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Man, what a mess.
And I can't help but wonder what all this bombing and crap is doing to the environment while it's
Right.
all going on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a tremendous cost. I mean, just even, there's so much cost in manufacturing military stuff, transporting it, maintaining it, and then you explode it. It's resources that you accumulate, wealth that you accumulate in order to destroy things.
And when you destroy things, all that dust goes up in the air and people
Right.
are breathing it. And
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, there's a tremendous environmental cost. Burning oil fields and all that kind of stuff too. Yeah. Anyway,
I have lived almost 70 years, and there has never been a time when so much was going wrong at the same time.
yeah. Yeah.
Do I sound hopeless?
No, I feel it. I mean, I'm with you. This I was actually thinking this morning, I'm not sure what I expected the end of the world to feel like, but it's a surprise every day. I'm like, oh, who saw this coming? you know. It definitely has that feel, and it's been years of this. Oh, one more thing. Okay, what's next? Hey, Robert and Megan.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Tony's not joining us today, and I think Melissa's out, so it may just be us. Tony's birthday is tomorrow, so when you see him, wish him a happy birthday. Let's see. Trying to find. Okay, there we go. Gallery. There you guys are. So if someone's joining us online on Facebook or YouTube, this is House Church online. If you are joining on the stream, if you wouldn't mind clicking like or just typing where you're watching from, that gives us a way to count you. We appreciate it. I guess since Tony and Melissa are out, let's do it this way. Paul, if you don't mind doing the Exodus passage today, and Megan, if you'll take the New Testament reading, and then Rob, can you? Angela, do you want to roll besides doing prayer concerns, or what's your preference?
I'm good with whatever. If you need somebody to do voice of the people, I can do that. If somebody will be voice of the people during prayer concerns.
Okay. Rob, how about you and Angela if you will be Rob the liturgist, and Angela will be voice of the people, and then can y'all just switch during prayer concerns? Will that work?
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, let me get the liturgy up. Oh, this will take me just a minute. I forgot a key thing here. Okay. Okay, there we go. You good to go, Rob?
Yeah, I'm good. I wasn't
Okay.
sure if you were all squared away.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm good to go. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, if you'll do the liturgy and then Angela
Yep,
will
no
do voice.
worries.
Thank you.
All right. On this week in 1455, Johannes Gutenberg's version of the printing press began printing Bibles. Although printing presses already existed, Gutenberg's use of movable type allowed the quick resetting of plates. This invention sparked a revolution of information. Not only did it allow the production of affordable Bibles, placing the power to interpret that Bible in the hands of regular people and kicking off the Protestant Reformation, but it also allowed the mass production of pamphlets and newspapers. The concept of a free press, free printing press, and the freedom of conscience and meaning making that goes along with it fundamentally changed how people thought about society and their place in it. It changed theology, the practice of worship, and the role of preaching in the Christian church. Hundreds of years later, believing that literacy increased the power and freedom of common people, churches in the United States started literacy classes on Sundays. The first Sunday schools were geared not just towards religious education, but literacy, so that people could read. Listen, Christ stands at the door and knocks.
We open the door for Christ, our neighbor and our sibling.
We likewise knock on the door of heaven.
God has set a feast for us in the presence of our enemies.
In this place where we give and receive divine hospitality,
Fear is banished, violence is gone, and there is abundance for all.
you are the God who works wonders.
You have made known among the peoples your power.
Psalm 22, 23 through 31. God, your way is in holiness. What other God is great as our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have made known among the peoples your power. With your own arm you have redeemed your people, the children of Asenath, and the children of Rachel and Leah, and Bilhah and Zilpah. The waters saw you, O God, the waters saw you and writhed as in labor. The very depths were shaken. The clouds poured out water, the skies thundered. Indeed, your arrows went about to and fro. The sound of your thunder was in the whirlwind. Your lightnings lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. In the sea was your way, and your paths in the many waters. Yet your footsteps were not seen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. You are the God who works wonders.
You have made known among the peoples your power.
Leviticus 19, 1 through 2, and 9 through 18. The living God spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to all the congregation of the women and men of Israel and say to them, You all shall be holy, for I, the eternal God, your God, am holy. When you all reap the harvest of your land, it shall not be completed to the very edge of your field for harvesting, and the gleanings of your harvest shall not be gathered. Your vineyard you shall not scrape bare, and the fallen grapes of your vineyard you shall not gather. You shall leave them for those oppressed through poverty and for the alien who resides in your land. I am the Holy One, your God. None of you shall steal, none of you shall deceive, and none of you shall lie to a compatriot. And none of you shall swear by my name to lie and so profane the name of your God. I am God whose name is holy. You shall not defraud your neighbor. You shall not steal. You shall not keep overnight for yourselves the wages of a laborer until morning. You shall not mock the deaf, and you shall not put a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am the living God.
Matthew 17. 6 days after Jesus told his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and biblical scholars and be killed, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and brought them up to a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured in front of them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. Then look, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Peter responded, saying to Jesus, "Teacher, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will pitch 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He was still speaking when, look, a cloud full of light overshadowed them. And then a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, the beloved, with him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell upon the ground and were very much afraid. Then Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." They looked up and they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, saying, "Tell no one about the vision until the Son of Woman from the dead has been raised." May God add blessing to the reading of this word.
Thanks be to God.
Regarding the reading and interpretation of the Bible, Harper Lee's character, Atticus Finch, says in To Kill a Mockingbird, "Sometimes the Bible in the hand of one man is worse than a whiskey bottle in the hand of another. There are just some kind of men who are so busy worrying about the next world, they've never learned to live in this one. And you can look down the street and see the results." Dave, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you. Hardware mute. I always forget that I've got a button right here. So thank you all for getting us started with worship today. We'll go into a time of prayer. Those of you who would like to lift up a prayer concern, feel free to do so. If you're on streaming on Facebook or YouTube, feel free to type a prayer concern in the comments and we'll incorporate it into our prayer. If you're on Zoom, you can also put it in the chat, or those of you on the panel, if you can just say it out loud, that'd be great. Let's go to God in prayer. God, sometimes it seems as though we are living at the end of the world. And though we are aware that there have been other times when things seemed dark and that things were ending, in one sense, it's always the end of the world. We feel the passage of time, opportunities lost to violence and oppression, time that could be spent loving and enjoying the planet and each other, enjoying your abundance. We squander in so many stupid ways. We lift up to you the people of Ukraine and all those places where violence, God, has become endemic. In our own society, where there is constant war, it just remains invisible. Especially those who live under the threat of violence, but also those who live under the threat of insufficient health care, of environmental racism and destruction. We lift up to you ourselves and our frustration and in our despair. We know, God, that you give reasons for hope, that after every moment that passes, you are so generous and that you bring another moment. Help us not to lose the precious treasure that is in front of us. Help us to control what we can control and to change the things that we can. We are mindful, God, that it is not information that will change the world, but only your divine transformation. We ask that you will help us to lean into the present moment to see what modes of grace you bring to us. Make us aware of your presence in the smallest things. God, we lift up to you the concerns of our hearts and people who are close to us, and I invite those of you listening to share prayer concerns or praises.
Vicky Sparks and John Bredehoff.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Kathy and Claire.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the Davises who are currently traveling, and for the McDaniels who will be coming to visit us this week.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Continued prayers for healing for Christina O'Quinn.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Prayers for Bill Horton and Noah Finlayson.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For wisdom for world leaders.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the transgender and LGBT communities.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those struggling with depression and difficult relationships.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gracious God, for the things that we have named and the things that remain unnamed, for the things that we don't even know how to put into words, we give you thanks that you hear and that you answer. And we share the prayer that Jesus taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your kingdom come, let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So I wanted to share today's Transfiguration Sunday. It is the last Sunday in the season of Epiphany, which is what happens after Christmas. And it's the Sunday before we kick off Lent, which is the season of preparation for Easter. It's kind of an interesting in-between time. It's one of those liminal times, and the story that we traditionally tell on this day is the story of the Transfiguration of Jesus and his small inner circle of the disciples going up a mountain and seeing Jesus revealed in his splendor. I really have just several things I want to say about this passage. I don't have I don't really have a sermon today that encapsulates it all into one, like this is what we should do then. And sometimes I will say preaching can be very frustrating because so often we take these Bible stories, which are full of nuance and symbolism and power, and we try to turn them into moral lessons. And I don't know that you can do that with this story. This is a story about Jesus being revealed, about something that was hidden being shown. There's a whole theme in the Bible of God hiding things and then showing things, of people searching for God and then recognizing, well, God's been right here all along. And in this story, it's similar. Jesus and his friends go up a mountain, and when he's revealed, it's not like he's a different Jesus. He's the same Jesus that's been with them the whole time. They just couldn't see this glory. They didn't see him as necessarily the Son of God in this shining, majestic image. And there's several things going on when they see with new eyes, with divine sight, when they see what's actually present. They see Jesus there with Moses and Elijah. So in their vision, Jesus is tied together with these historical figures. Now, this would be like if we were to encounter great heroes of our past, just kind of there in front of us. And I mean, we could be encountering Jesus himself. We could be encountering, I don't know, Junior. We could be encountering any number of historical characters right there in front of us. And there's a tie, like these people aren't just in the past, they're present, they're with us right now. So Jesus is with his ancestors. And they see, in a way, this cloud of witnesses around Jesus. It's an intimate gathering, but it ties him together with people who we thought were dead but are still active. We hear the voice of God. And of course, we imagine it booming. This is my son, the beloved, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. So God's providing a little bit of editorial context. Like, if you didn't get that Jesus is important because he's standing here with Moses and Elijah, let me just remind you, this is who Jesus is. They see a visual representation. They see Jesus shining as though he is lit from within by the sun. His clothes become dazzling white. This is kind of the image that we often try to capture Jesus in when he's painted. He's wearing white, which again would be very impractical for someone walking around the countryside. But in this moment, he's transfigured. It's like he is radiant. Another way to think about it is he's shining with all the colors, right? And it's just dazzling. Again, there's this image we have of Jesus glorified, and it often involves this majestic language, Jesus being lifted up, Jesus shining, Jesus standing with the saints, the voice of God booming. It's almost kind of stereotypical what we think of a religious vision. But I think what's powerful about this is it's a revelation. It's always present. It's not just that we hear it as transfigured, Jesus being transformed, but the idea is this is Jesus walking around all the time. The ancestors are with him all the time. He's always God's son. It's just that our perceptual filters are such that we can't see what's actually there. In religious circles, we often talk about mountaintop experiences, and this is kind of the trope of one. This is the one that sets the standard, right? You go up a mountain, you have a religious experience, and then hopefully you're changed. So when you go back down the mountain, your everyday life doesn't go back to normal. It's somehow altered. You carry a bit of this vision with you as you go. And I think all that is contained in this passage. I think that's part of the implication, that the disciples couldn't see Jesus the same way after that moment. one thing that happens today that kind of bothers me is that a lot of times when we look at the disciples, so this is usually who we relate to in this story. It's hard for me to relate to Moses or Elijah or Jesus, but I can imagine being one of the disciples sitting there watching this event, being overwhelmed, right? And Peter doesn't really know what to say. He says, "This is amazing. It's good for us to be here. I tell you what, Jesus, I'll pitch 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And a lot of times preachers will preach this passage as though Peter doesn't know what he's doing. Like he's some dumb yokel who's like, he's trying to hold on to the experience, and they try to make it about that. What would you do? What would you do if this was revealed to you? If your best friend were transformed in front of your eyes and you saw, oh, he's a divine being and he's standing with my ancestors and God says I should listen to him. What would you do? You're like, oh yeah, okay, that's fine. Let's go back. Crazy. Peter is offering hospitality. This is what you do to divine beings. Okay. Divine beings show up. You offer them hospitality. You say, can I get you a meal? You want a place to sit? Here, I'll pitch a tent for you. It's getting dark. If you want to stay overnight, pitch a tent for you. You'll be fine. Thanks for being here. Peter's expressing his appreciation. And that's what I would do. I would say, it's good for me to be here. Thank God, right? Thank God I have a moment of clarity when things become crystal clear. And isn't that what we are longing for right now in this crazy world? A moment of transfiguration where we can see things for what they really, and go, oh yeah, this is the direction we're going. Oh yeah, God's with us. Listen to Jesus. We're with our ancestors, feeling embraced in that way, feeling purposeful in that way. Isn't that what we want? Pitch a tent. Absolutely. That's what I want to do. I think Peter responds the way we want to respond. That moment of clarity, that moment of joy and vision is so important. I also think it's important the way it happens. Jesus doesn't bring a giant crowd of people with him to the top. That would be an impressive thing, right? In fact, if you remember earlier in the story, that's what the devil tempted Jesus with. Hey, you could show your glory to all these people and really impress them. Yeah. Jesus doesn't do that. He takes his inner circle, the people closest to him, up to the top of the mountain. He gives them the privilege of seeing it. And afterwards, he says, don't tell anyone, right? This is not what I want to base my ministry on, people being overwhelmed and impressed because I can do magic. That's not what this is about, right? So he tells them, this is a secret between you and me. And it must have been really hard for the disciples to hang on to that secret, I would think. But to have that reassurance, to have that vision, I think allowed them to endure what was coming next, because Jesus had told them, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and suffer and die. And in order to make it through that process, I need to give you something to hang on to. That's why I think part of the end of this, it's important. God's voice booms out. The disciples cower in fear. They're terrified. They're fearful. They bow down. And the next thing you know, Jesus is saying, don't be afraid. Again, this sounds like a crazy statement, right? If I have a vision like that, I'm going to be afraid. If I hear the voice of God speaking to me, seeing this kind of stuff, and I heard the voice of God, I would be terrified. And yet Jesus says, this is not something to be terrified of. God is on our side. God's with us. Don't be afraid. Which is what we hear often whenever angels speak. Don't be afraid. This fearsome sight, and don't be afraid. And I think part of it's about the fearsome sight, and part of it's about what comes next, right? Because they're about to go down and experience all this. And it's important for them to hang on to that vision of what's been revealed to them. I think about our own human relationships. I don't remember the name of the psychologist, but recently people have talked about the number of social connections we can actually have. You can only keep in your head, generously about 1,000 people, and you can only maintain close relationship. Oh, thanks, Teresa. Dunbar's number, yes. And it's a little bit controversial because it may not be exactly this, but the idea is, and you can envision this, right? I only have time to give a lot of my affection and attention to a small number of people. And for most of us, that's somewhere between 3 and 5. And then every circle outside that, you kind of triple it. So beyond that, 15 people I can maintain pretty good friendships with. Beyond that, 150 people, it extends, right? 150 acquaintances, and then beyond that, 700, 1,000 people who I just sort of have weak ties with. And it makes me mindful that for God to be incarnate in a human being means that Jesus couldn't have that kind of intimate friendship as a mortal human being with everybody on the planet. Jesus could only have about 3 people as his inner circle. Only about 3 people who could be privileged with this revelation, and that would carry them through what was going to happen next. Except in another sense, I think that's how God is always incarnate. God is always incarnate in people and through relationships. That there's probably 3 to 5 people who know you really well, right? And beyond them, maybe a dozen, 15. Beyond them, maybe 50, 100, 150. And there's something about who we choose to reveal ourselves to, and how God is present in those relationships. I think the story tells us something about what we need to keep going in the midst of struggle, that relationship is important, that self-disclosure is important. And my hope is that we would find those mystical moments of relationships in our closest relationships when we see that our ancestors are with us, that we are beloved, that God hasn't left us, that we don't need to be afraid. My hope is that we could all have that kind of experience and carry it with us through the crap that we're going through right now, COVID, war, end of the world type stuff, that somehow that vision would give us sustenance to keep going, that it would strengthen those relationships, and that we wouldn't be afraid. It's a tall order, especially right now. But I'm glad that Peter and James and John had this vision. I like my idiosyncratic interpretation of this passage, which is sort of a Star Trek kind of thing. All times, time is an illusion. All times are present at all times. That when Moses went up the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments, and Elijah went up the mountain to see God, and Jesus went up the mountain and he encountered Moses and Elijah, that it's all the same event. Like, it's all happening at the same time, and it's a nexus of space-time sci-fi madness, and Jesus is present there because that's who Moses is seeing, and that's who Elijah is seeing, right? Again, I think it's a revelation. It's a showing. And that's why I think, even though sometimes it feels like this is the end of the world, it's always the end of the world, right? The transfiguration is always happening. The crucifixion is always happening. And that's what the transfiguration is saying to me today. So, comments, questions, responses, would love to hear your thoughts.
I like the take where those mountaintop experiences are there to cling on to later. Years ago, I was at an Emmaus walk, which is a type of spiritual retreat. And a friend from the church I was at, Ruth, was there. And Ruth had been struggling with some stuff. And it was an overpowering experience for her. And at the end of the walk, everybody's given a chance to talk for a minute. And she got up and said that it was the most powerful experience of her life, that it had changed her, and she would never be able to look at God again. She said it was literally a mountaintop experience. Well, as we were packing up to leave that day, an older woman walked over to our car and put her hand on Ruth's shoulder and said, "Ruth, I need to tell you that after mountaintop experiences, you can expect for all hell to break out." And Ruth just kind of laughed about it. Well, we went home, and the next day Ruth called me and said that when she got home that evening, that the police raided her home. Her oldest son was arrested for selling drugs. About a week later, she got diagnosed with MS. Everything was falling apart in her life, and she literally kept hanging on to that Emmaus experience, that mountaintop experience, as the thing that got her through some of the worst days of her life. And I can look at my own life, and I, in retrospect, did not realize it then, but those few mountaintop experiences I had were always to prepare me for some kind of big, troubling event that was to come.
Camille's comment in the chat seems apropos here. She says, "I can't help but contrast this moment for Peter to his reaction after Jesus is arrested and Peter denies him. We think we'll be forever changed when God is revealed to us, but how easy it is to then deny God when the crap hits the fan. Keeping the faith is tough work." So we've got.
Wow, thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts or response to this? I
I
can't
saw you
hear
on
me.
mute, Rob. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was still trying to formulate something. You go first.
Okay. Yeah, I was watching you and it looked like you were ready to chime in, so I didn't want to. I guess so the thing that jumps out at me here, this passage always strikes me as a classic example of how things suffer when read with the wrong emotional sensibility. And what I'm thinking about here is growing up, listening to people read the Bible, in worship with just this very flat sing-song cadence that's so emotionally distancing, right? And it feels so important to me to recognize here, like you're saying, Dave, we get very judgy toward Peter, or preachers will get very judgy and they're like, "Oh, this is ridiculous." But hear what he's saying. I have heard people say this, right? After a really powerful experience in worship or whatever, people with eyes full of tears say, "I'm so glad I was here." Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what Peter's saying. "I'm so glad I'm here."
Yeah.
He's overwhelmed by this, right? And so to give him, to be able to acknowledge that just feels really important to me. That it's these are people having recognizable emotions, rather than letting it be just this, historic old text where, almost like you're reading Aesop's fables or something, where it's like, well, there's a tortoise and a hare, and you just have no emotional connection to it all. Recognize these are people who are having emotions that you would recognize. And this is, just what is going on here is that Peter is just overflowing with the sense of amazement and gratitude that, perhaps you have experienced.
Yeah.
And just to collapse that distance, and so then when you get into the idea of the great cloud of witnesses, the communion of saints, all these people who are suddenly part of this and present, that nexus of space and time, right? Mm-hmm. Recognizing that all those people are present, not just in an abstract or an intellectual sense, but somehow to accept that your deep emotion is connecting you with that, right? That those things, there's feedback there, that what you're feeling is coming out of that. and that there's actually an opportunity to interact there. That like you see them and they see you, right? This is
Yeah.
I remember watching an episode of some paranormal investigation thing. I mean, it was like very Sunday afternoon on the History Channel, right? So, but like they were talking about, it was like a haunted museum ship, right? And somebody was claiming that they had an experience where they actually saw, what they thought was like, oh gosh, it's like a ghost of, an old sailor from World War II or whatever. Except they thought that the sailor saw them and was like, what is that? Right? I love that. So that thought of like we are all present together, and I mean, and that's what when we say that in communion, right? That there is this greater body of the faithful that we are connecting with and communing with. That was a huge conceptual leap for me when I was younger, to get past the idea of just, will people die, and like some of them are waiting around in heaven and we're here and sort of embrace that sense that no, man, you don't always see it, but everybody is always present.
Yeah,
always connected. That just feels hugely important to me.
Thank you for that. I appreciate both. So I want to kind of echo and say, like you talked about that feeling of surprise and that very human, that emotional validation, right? That Peter says it's good for us to be here. I love the way Willa Gaffney's translation says, look, and look. I mean, the way she does the translation, you feel that, that's surprise, right? And the second thing, what you were saying about connection, in nature and force therapy, one of the things that I really appreciated, and there's a kind of guided meditation you do, and your eyes are closed. But one of the things that you sometimes end with is, as you open your eyes slowly, imagine that everything that you are seeing sees you back. And what you just said, again, to me, that sense of recognition, that the idea that all of creation, our ancestors, the trees, all this stuff out there, that there is an awareness of you. Like you're not like, I'm a passive observer floating through the world looking at things. It's that you are recognized, and that moment of, hey, hey friend, I see you, is just a powerful thing. I mean, they saw Moses and Elijah. I kind of imagine Moses and Elijah go, who are those guys? And what kind of moment that would be if you're Peter or James or John. Like, I think that's brilliant. Thanks for sharing that.
I think I just had a light bulb go off because we're talking about continuity. The fact that we're talking about the printing press at the beginning of this it's really appropriate, because so the mountaintop experience is connecting these, three figures, giants in like this theological journey, and people who've changed, the course of history as they've walked through wherever they were. And I think about, well, two things. We're currently watching Foundations, which is
just Foundation.
Just Foundation? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
It's based on the Asimov series, which I have not read, but part of the concept is that this guy has done a bunch of math, and he's figured out that this civilization as he knows it is going to change, and this empire is going to end, and it's going to be brutal. And he knows of a way that they can make the bad part last less long, like, which is basically to write a book of, he calls it the foundation of something for people to build upon. And I kind of think about the fact that Peter and James and John, they knew who those people were, because knowledge of them and what they had said and what they had done was passed down to them, some of it written down, I guess I imagine mostly they heard it orally. That's very pre-printing press. I also kind of think of this. It's a Ted Chiang short story. I think, or is it? Yeah. Or maybe I'm thinking of a different one. Anyway, it's a short story about a person who, like a civilization who hasn't had writing yet, and how like when that's introduced to their culture, it completely changes their perspective on history and on lots of things, like life itself. So we have the connection is what changes us, I think, connecting us to these things that are linear. We're not starting over every time somebody dies, and or even when a civilization falls, we're continuing the path.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, Angela, you got your hand up.
Yes, we have a comment. I think it's it's from YouTube. Username Giant Robots Conquer the World, which is a great username, by the way. That's awesome. Who says, I once heard someone describe this as Jesus coming out to his friends. He takes his closest friends and shows them a part of himself that he's been hiding. It's not time to show that part of himself to everyone yet, but he's ready to show his closest friends.
Wow, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. It's such an interesting event because it has these close personal meanings, and I love that idea of Jesus is coming out. And then it's got these sort of global cosmic significance as well. And I think that's one of the things that makes it an interesting, such a rich story. Megan, some of what you were just saying about like the difference between oral and literal cultures, and how the printing press has changed the way that we think. Even just being able to say something like taking the Bible literally, like you couldn't take the Bible literally until people were literate. It was like it didn't make sense to think of like as it's written. Well, it was such an oral thing. I remember reading Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and the wife of Bath has her own kind of interesting interpretation of Genesis, and it's like it's hers. Like, it's obviously that there's oral tradition and she's heard it and she's reframed the story. She's not sitting down doing textual analysis or exegesis. She's got the story, right, and she's making it her own. And I think about the ways that, I mean, even the very nature of preaching is such an oral thing, but we live in a literal culture, and I guess more and more a visual culture. But anyway, I'll shut up. Yeah, Rob?
Megan used a word that I think is really powerful here, and it was continuity. And one of the other things that Harry Seldon says in Foundation, right, about the project is that it's not just about preserving the knowledge, it's about preserving humanity's story, right? Being able to situate yourself in that narrative is really powerful. I think about something we've observed, in recent weeks, right, about asserting yourself and saying, I'm part of this, right? Well, you can kind of invert that and talk about the power of not just starting from a blank slate, but saying, this is where I'm coming from. This is what we're building on, right? This is the context. This is the continuity. And I think, so there's this, like, what's being revealed for Jesus's closest friends here when he comes out to them is what movie they're in, right? To use a term that we've trotted out before, that they now have a much deeper understanding of the continuity because it's before them. Here are the connections, right? I mean, Moses and Elijah, like, whoa, really? When she used continuity, like that thought was so pressing, that it's about knowing what movie you're in, and the experience of understanding that movie, and being like, whoa, this is the movie? Holy cow. Like, that's big.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
We also have these other like instances in the Old Testament, but also in the Gospels of it being very important to whoever wrote them to trot out the genealogy.
Yeah.
And you got to wonder, like, was this one of the moments that kind of inspired that aspect? I mean, well, it was always important. So, I mean, to the Jewish culture, I would think, because the Bible is full of begats. So, like,
Right.
I mean, it's kind of highlighting that element. Like, this story has been going on for a really long time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for Jesus to be present with Moses, who was 1,500 years earlier, and Elijah, who was 500-600 years earlier, like this is a very long story, and it's like it's putting him in line with these other prophets and epic changing figures. Yeah. Other thoughts, responses? I want to say something about the Old Testament lesson, the Hebrew Bible story. I loved the way that Willa Gaffney took she took the 10 Commandments, but she also included things that we don't normally, like this isn't the canonical 10. She put in the not gleaning to the edge of your field. I mean, not harvesting to the edge of your field. And the one that's about not putting obstacles in front of people with disabilities. With this, I mean, it really conveys a different ethical sense to the way we normally think of the 10 Commandments as don't do this, don't do that. Instead, it's like you have a responsibility to all people, right, and to all creation. And I love the fact that she doesn't limit it to the 10 Commandments, but shows how that's part of this larger. It's not just your individual actions; it's how you're connected to all these other people. Okay, well, that's all I got. So you guys ready? I appreciate the discussion, and I appreciate those of you who tuned in. If you have been watching on the stream via Facebook or YouTube, again, if you don't mind, just like or comment. Let us know that you were watching with us, so we have a way to count you. We appreciate that. I have a couple of announcements, and I do want this to be for the larger community, and then we'll stop the stream after we end. Oh wait, we'll conclude, and then I'll do the announcements. My bad. Let me switch over here. And just because I didn't make it clear here, Rob, if you do closing prayer, and then Angela, if you don't mind doing the blessing.
God, grant us the kind of literacy that allows us to read not only the Bible, but the times, the seasons, and our own hearts. Let the world know that its salvation depends not just on information, but transformation. Amen.
May the strength of God pilot us. May the power of God preserve us. May the wisdom of God instruct us. May the hand of God protect us. May the way of God direct us. May the shield of God defend us. May the host of God guard us against the snares of the evil ones, against temptations of the world. May Christ be with us. May Christ be before us. May Christ be in us. Christ be over all. May thy salvation, Lord, always be ours this day, O Lord, and evermore. Amen.
Amen. I just had sort of an out of time experience because I was hearing Angela speak, and then I was coming in to the headphones, and then I wasn't sure if she was saying it on Zoom first, and then I was hearing her in real life. It was kind of weird. So I appreciate that moment of time warp. Couple of announcements. Since Lent is getting kicked up here, we will have, first of all, tomorrow there is a ecumenical gathering of prayer for Ukraine at Southside Baptist Church in Five Points in Birmingham. So those of you who are local, if you want to attend that, Melissa will be there. I will try to be there. I've got class Monday nights, but I'm hoping that I can be there after class. So that's at 7:00 at Southside Baptist Church. Wednesday, there will be an Ash Wednesday devotional service at Avondale Park for any St. Junia folks who'd like to participate. Again, small. This is not an hour-long Ash Wednesday service with a choir. This is Melissa's going to be leading this one with. She'll have the ashes and short devotional, and anyone who's willing to be there can come get ashes. Outdoor service, socially distant, that kind of stuff. And then throughout Lent, there's going to be a book study on women's ways of knowing. So those of you who would like to participate, and you don't have to be a woman to participate. It's a good thing for men to read too. That's going to happen on Wednesdays, and that's in the newsletter too. I think we said 6:30 is the time that starts, but it'll be a Zoom book study also. And finally, although house churches, Crestline will meet this Sunday. The next time our house churches will meet in person, we're going to have a potluck on March 13th in the evening. We found it's kind of hard. I mean, it's been really difficult to try to get house churches going because it's like we start something and then another variant comes along or some other kind of whatever happens, and just trying to gather together in the apocalypse has proven difficult. So we're going to do a potluck during the apocalypse. Figure that's a little easier, just to be together, to be with each other. Again, it won't be a full worship service. We'll probably have a prayer and a short devotional, but it's mostly just so that we can be together and support each other. And that'll be March 13th. Again, it'll be outside if the weather's nice at the Powell's house in Homewood. So, all right. So I'm going to stop the stream. And those of you on Zoom, if you'll stick around for just a minute.